I'm talking with our fellow classmate, class of 66, Sheila Grinell, author of two books, The Appetite and The Contract. I noticed that one deals with a Indian guru and her two doubting parents, Maggie and Paul. And the contract deals with basically the Saudi experience. And what inspired you to write these books? Is there anything in your Harvard experience that, or when did you know that you'd be a writer? I know that you had another career for 40 years, but.
Yeah, I had another career first. So yeah, I think my Harvard experience contributed directly, though I wasn't aware of it at the time, because I went to Bronx High School of Science and I had a lot of math. And I thought I was going to be a mathematician. And I got to school, and because I had all that math, I was put in fancy physics 13, which was really not understandable. So I demoted myself to the ordinary physics, and that was okay. And for mechanics was okay, and light and optics was okay. And I got to electricity and magnetism. And there were all these guys in the class who knew what they were talking about. And I had never played around with that stuff. And I just couldn't, it just didn't make sense to me. So I said, well, I can't do physics, therefore I can't do mathematics, therefore I should go home. And my boyfriend at the time said, no, don't go home. What do you like? And I said, well, I really like my freshman English composition class. I like Gen Ed.
Gen Ed, sure.
And he said, so major in English. So I did. And it was May of senior year, and I'm walking across the quad, and I realized that what I liked about math was the same as what I liked about poetry. They both define a little world, and you can draw a little box, and that's the world. And when you get comfortable, you can move around and manipulate inside that world. And you get really comfortable, you know how to jump out. And I realized that my what I had learned was, it didn't matter what I majored in, concentrated in, as we said.
Right.
It didn't matter because I'd learned how to learn, and that was really fun. So then, with the science side, I built science museums for 40 years.
Know that.
San Francisco, New York. I consulted around the world. And then I moved to Arizona to be the founding CEO of the Arizona Science Center, which turned out to be my final one. Then I realized I was done. I like startups. I like the blank page. And the field was mature now. There really wasn't that much room for startup. So I began to consult, because that's what I knew, and looked around for something else. And then what happened was quite by accident. My mother had a stroke and she lost her mind. And it's like somebody stabbed me in the belly. I had to write her story. So I wrote my mom's story. I got some help from a creative writing center here at Arizona State University. And then I realized that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write. So in my 60s, I switched paths and I began to write novels. And there's two down, that you mentioned. Thank you very much, Fred. And I'm working on the third. And the third is actually set here in Arizona. I've lived here almost 30 years now. I'm ready to tackle it in fiction. But this book, The Contract actually set in the museum world. It's going to be the only one of my books that's going to be set there. Because I did this consultant work in Saudi Arabia. And it's so different. You can't make it up. You have to have, it's so strange. And I realized, we live in such fraught times, and you think about what can people tolerate, what can people not tolerate. And I realized I had this extreme. So I realized if I was going to use Saudi Arabia, I'd have to use the museum context, because that's the only one I really knew. So I created this couple. They're a couple of museum designers, man and wife, and they live in Oakland, California. And they get challenged to compete for a job in Saudi Arabia. Oakland, California, and Saudi Arabia. Now that's the spectrum that was bound to produce a bunch of creative tension.
That's spanning the world.
Yeah, good for drama. My readers tend to be more female than male. They tend to be over 45, and many of them are over 55. And they live in places where I have connections. A lot of them live here in Arizona. A whole bunch live in New York, a whole bunch live in Seattle, the places where my friends have helped spread the word. It's very hard to spread the word in these, my publisher communicates to retailers. They have a sales force as part of within Ingram Publishing Services, and they communicate to retailers. And then the publicist communicates to media. And who communicates to readers individually? The author. Right. So I spend a lot of time, so naturally, my readers tend to be where I have talked to people directly. We live in such fraught times. I've been thinking about tolerance and how people were having so much trouble doing it. And I was in New York and I was with a friend, a lovely woman, kind, generous person, a little, around our age. And she was talking to her sister with just utter contempt. I was shocked. How come she hasn't learned to deal with her sister by now? What makes us develop tolerance and what stops it? And then I realized I could use my experience in Saudi Arabia as one extreme. Well, that's how that one came about. So I haven't deliberately wanted to write with international themes or flavors, but those experiences kind of gave me a whole field of life that I could include in my stories. My very absolute favorite passage, which I think is just, I don't know where I got it from, but it's genius. I can't read that to you because it's a spoiler. And I hope that you and many of other classmates read the book. And I'm on a regular Zoom with other women who were freshmen in Cabot Hall. There's about 20 of us. Yeah. Isn't that something? There's about 20 of us who Zoomed a couple of fairly regularly during the pandemic. And they did read the contract and we had a good talk about it. But I hope other classmates haven't read it, and I'm not going to spoil it for you.
I'm talking to Larry Palmer, class of 66 classmate, who's an author of a book called Scholarship Boy. Larry has previously published 2 scientific scholarly health policy and bioethics books, but this is this first excursion into a narrative. The book flap says that Scholarship Boy, where Palmer reflects on his experiences as a young Black boy growing up far from home, learning to fit into a white world without becoming estranged from his closely knit family. And writes about the delicate, complex balances within the family and illustrates the ways his sibling relationships shaped him as he was also being molded by an elite education. High-blown words, but all I could think of was leaving home from a close-knit, large family at the age of 14 and how scared you must have been.
Yes and no. I don't think I was up for this adventure. I very much wanted to go to Exeter. My father was reluctant, I think for lots of reasons. I was very small at the time. It's hard for people at Harvard to believe that I weighed less than 100 pounds when I arrived on the Exeter campus. But I think I was ready for an adventure outside of my family, being the 9th child and that large family, which also had lots of academic stars in it. I wanted to sort of feel myself in the world. And I think most kids who are successful at boarding school, and I'm not just talking grade-wise, but enjoy and grow from the experience, have a little bit of that they didn't quite either fit into the public school, and I'm not sure I would have fit into the public school, high school I was supposed to go to. And they are sort of free or liberated by being in an environment where they can be the teenagers they are. I mean, but I think one of the main reasons I was so interested in, not interested, but the memoir just kept coming back to me, or in essay forms, was people often ask me, how did you get to Exeter? And I always say, my older brothers convinced my dad to let me go. And they go, what? Yes, I had these older brothers who fought, advocated with my dad so that I could have much greater opportunities than they ever had. Don't you have older brothers like that? And most people would go, no. And I got just intrigued with how I was shaped by those relationships, because they were so close-knit, and bringing a reader into that story of how one child veers off the path that the other kids are on, I thought might be of interest to readers. I think what the way I constructed the book was, yes, I'm a Black man, but probably more important, I'm a member of this multi-generational family of 10 siblings. And I think what my book does, unlike many more memoirs by Black writers, male, it's not a dramatic action growth. It's an attempt to find my own humanity, which I think is the main problem that we're struggling with still in this country, is how can you present yourself as a human being in a divided country that's racially divided like ours? And I thought the family story helped me tell my human story, so that there are lots of points in the book where you can't tell, is that because I'm Black, or is that because I grew up in this large complex family that certain things happened to me? The reason why I liked it, page 9, is particularly the train scene where I'm on the train and crying, is that the introductory story, what many writers call the emotional river of the book, is right there. I'm anxious to go to Exeter, but I know I'm leaving something behind, affection and deep ties. And if you look at the whole page, the passage when I'm on the bridge, I'm sort of suspended between two worlds as I cross the Mississippi River. So I like that notion that we get the boy on the train, but the boy is still the boy. He's not the adult. He's not the independent graduate of Harvard College. He's a 14-year-old kid who's never spent a night away from home on a train by himself. And I like that. But the second part is straddling two worlds. My sister, Leila, my second oldest sister, is, by coincidence, marries approximately at the same time and moves to Los Angeles, but always in St. Louis. I told her once, I once calculated her first 6 years of marriage, 3 of those years were spent in St. Louis with her family. But we were kind of the outsiders. She's on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, and I felt easily able to talk to her. Now, writing that chapter of Dancing with My Sister when I'm 9 years old was just such a delight, because I could go back and choreograph that dance with words of what it feels like to be taught to dance, to how to position your body, how to respect your partner's body. So, and the second part about my sister is that she's actually there all the time. She's there before I go away to Exeter. She happens to be there, notices that I'm too nervous to eat. She's there when my dad dies and calls me in the third part. So she sort of dances, someone says she sort of dances through the whole story in a very nice way. And the last part, if I could read to a Harvard audience, is my dad comes to my Harvard graduation, and I, being the self-involved teenager, had noticed that he had a cane. He's walking on a cane. He's very slow. He's walking up from Lowell House. We're down, I'm showing my parents around, being sort of like a docent. I've always wanted to be a docent. And just reeling stuff off. In mid-sentence, my mother grabs my arm and she stops me and she says, looks back, my dad's behind us. She says, your dad's waited all his life to see you graduate from Harvard and you're going to slow down. And I turned around and I looked at my dad and saw that just look of delight in his eyes. It had nothing to do with Harvard. It had to do with me. And maybe that was one of the few times I had my parents really to myself, my dad to myself. So I walked back, put my arm in his arm, and moved at his pace for the entire rest of graduation.
You have me missing up on that.
Oh, it's such a beautiful scene of just memory that's my dad. He loves me. He's doing everything he can for me. I was really angry when they told me they couldn't help me at first, but I realized I got a check. I was a child of a disabled worker. I got a Social Security check. I had a Harvard National Scholarship. I did not have a lot of loans when I left Harvard. And because I had a great job. And so that moment of recognition was just so perfect. It just evoked just the idea of walking at the same pace my dad could walk to, allowed me to kind of recapture a lot of my childhood with my dad. So my dad comes, and it also explains to some degree why the funeral is such that I don't shed a tear, but 3 weeks after I get back to Yale Law School, 3 weeks later, I wake up in the middle of the night and did a fit of tears. And once again, it's that part of my personality is that sometimes pushing things away, which I had to, writing a book made me so much aware of that I can do it in very strange situations, even though my sister warned me that was going to happen to me.
Almost all my work begins with white fabric or paper. Then I use a variety of techniques to transform the cloth or paper. My earlier work focused on shibori, a Japanese resist dyeing technique. I've also done quite a bit of snow dyeing, a technique where you pour dye through snow onto the fabric below. This results in a plethora of colors and crystallized patterns that cannot be achieved in any other way. More recently, I've been using paper and fabric combined, or paper alone. After transforming the fabric or paper, I collage it onto a background substrate. Most of my work is heavily machine quilted or embroidered, adding another layer of texture and interest.
Here are some plates that I made using porcelain with colorants added. The patterns are not applied on the surface, but run through the clay, so they are visible on both the front and the back. The process is really arduous, and there are so many ways for it all to end in disaster. That's why I've included the image of the shards, an all too common reminder of failure. So it's really incredibly rewarding when a piece makes it successfully through all the hoops.
I've had fiber in my hands ever since I made a Christmas tree ornament in kindergarten. After a BA in Anthro, I gravitated to the fine arts and fiber art. I posted these 5 quilts to illustrate my evolution from earlier work that often used 50 to 60 colors, as in Red Volunteer, through minimalist color fields using 3 colors, like primary colors, to no dyed color at all, as in white goods, and finally to translucent quilts where a phantom secondary layer shows through the white top layer, as in Translucent Volunteer. In 2017, I turned to weaving as a beginner, and I continued to build skills in that rich and complex field.
I've loved to paint since earliest childhood. It's kept me centered through all the ups and downs of career and life. Painting opens up the hidden world, making me slow down and wonder. The intense concentration for coordinating hand and eye and object painted, or in abstract work, concept painted, changes my apprehension. Why I choose one color or line is often a mystery, stemming from both emotion and conscious decision. An adventure unfolds as forms not preconceived emerge. I hope the viewer experiences some of this when viewing my paintings.
As some like to say, quilters cut up perfectly fine fabrics and then sew them back together again. Here's one example that I began during the early phase of the pandemic. The muted side represents the wilderness with diagonals of sun and sky. These give the quilt a lot of movement. I know I certainly wanted to get out of our viral wilderness as soon as I could. The brighter colors on the reverse side express what I expect the celebration of our new normal will feel like, at least at first. The process of designing and stitching this quilt gave me a much-needed respite during this prolonged crisis.
I've been creating art in many different ways for more than 50 years. Always some studio art, drawing, painting, collaging, but probably more effectively, various kinds of public art. Site-specific installations, both temporary and permanent, and currently community engagement projects in which I come up with the ideas and others participate, both by expanding the idea and adding particular elements. Many examples of all these appear on my website, janegreengold.com.